Okay, screen should be coming up any moment now. All right, there we go. So, um, week 10. God, hard to believe that we're already in week 10, eh? All right, well, so a few things to talk about today, but I want to get into the new material right away. So, I think you're going to find this is kind of interesting and fun. Kind of builds on in the in the theme of what we did last week. I think last week was kind of fun, working with images, uploading files and pictures, and seeing how to display them and so on. By the way, I mentioned before that the next part of the homework assignment is to actually add images to the customer in the catering management application. So obviously, a customer might be an individual or might be a corporation. So it could be things like uploading the company logo, using that as the profile picture, or it could be the individual picture of a person as well. So I do have a tiny bit more work to do on the instructions for the next part of the homework. I should have that up by later today or earlier tomorrow morning. So just giving you a heads up of what to do next there. Now, this next bit of material is every bit as much fun as I hope you had with the image manipulation and so on. And that is to do with Excel and working with more advanced queries and so on as well, summary queries and things like that. As I say here, working with Excel, I tell you, it opens up so much in terms of the work that you can do for your clients. The business world runs on spreadsheets to a great degree. And in my experience, I've done a lot of work with clients in the past, pulling data from all different kinds of database systems, massaging it in different ways. And quite often, what they really want is to get it out into an Excel spreadsheet so then they can do further work with it or generate all different other kinds of reports and so on and so forth. Right. Now, it used to be very challenging, to be honest with you. Well, yes and no. I mean, it was challenging. It was easy if you were working on a computer that had Microsoft Office installed, because then all the DLLs and everything else needed to work with Office objects would be in place. And that's actually how I did so much of the work that I did over the years for different clients. But a web application was different because usually companies, web hosting, web servers, and so on, they don't want to have the all the DLLs and everything from Microsoft Office installed because, well, they're very resource hungry, right? And if you need to spin up one of these objects for each and every user that's connecting to the system, very quickly you'll overtask the actual web server itself, right? So it was always a big issue that, okay, it's fine on a standalone application running locally on a PC, no problem, but a web application really couldn't do much in the way of Excel manipulation unless you had your own dedicated web server that you were hosting it on and you could provide all the resources that it needed, right? Now that changed. That all changed when Microsoft switched the format of their Office documents. They've gone to this Open Office or Office Open. I've heard it put both ways, XML format. Now, we're familiar with XML. In fact, even HTML is a subset of XML, Extensible Markup Language, right? Um, and so basically, it's text-based, right? Opening and closing tags, the kind of things that we're used to. So Office documents are now basically a text document like that in a special zipped format, right? And that has opened up the door because now we no longer need to have all the DLLs and so on for Office to be installed on the web server because really it's just text. And as long as we can manipulate it properly, we're good, right? So now you can do it completely from scratch. Okay, if you just hate yourself or you just like to do everything from scratch, I guess. But fortunately, there's a number of tools out there that where people have done a lot of the grunt work and they've put things in place that makes it very, very easy for us to work with this Office Open, Open Office, XML directly through these different tools, right? One of the very popular ones is EPPlus, and that's the one that we're going to utilize today. EPPlus has been around for quite a number of years. It's gone through many different versions over the with bug fixes and then new features added and so on over time. One thing I'll just mention right away: when they went to version 5 and beyond, and all the updates since then, they moved away from a license that allowed basically it was more or less an open source license, right? Now it's excuse me, it's no longer totally free to use, at least for commercial use, right? So that's a big difference. So now it's free still. You can download the latest and greatest version, and by all means go ahead and use it during development time while you're a student here and so on. But you can't turn around and then use that without, following the letter of the license agreement that you're using to use anything beyond that. One of the workarounds for that situation basically is the fact that we can just install, at least right now it's still available, uh, one of the older versions. So I usually go with the very last version of version 4, and that's what I will install and use because it does all the basics that I've probably ever needed so far, right? Now, yeah, they've added some new great features and so on since then. And if you want to, you can play around with the newer versions, but for what we're going to do, especially today, there's no need, right? I'll just point out here that I've got some nice links that you can follow. So here's all kinds of documentations. Here's a whole wiki on EPPlus, right? You can get into all kinds of sort of tutorial work here on exactly how to do all the different things and so on. And I also have, this is a nice resource. It's getting a little old now, but it still is fully valid, and all these techniques still work. It's a collection of little snippets, cheat sheets, so to speak, for working with these OpenXML spreadsheets and showing you how to do different things, how to work with ranges and images and so on and so forth. So there's lots of resources for you here to, take what you're learning today and build on it and add even more capabilities in, right? But we're going to do a quick example of working with EPPlus and getting data out of the database in our web application and actually putting it into a spreadsheet the user can then download, right? So if you follow along with this code 16 file, you notice I've got some of the same information repeated at the top here, right? And then I note that what we're doing is I'm going to install this particular package, 4.5.3.3. That's the last one before they went to version 5 and the license changed, right? Just to mention here, we're going to be looking at 3 different approaches today, using an anonymous type just with a link query, right? And that's what we're going to do in our first example, where we're actually going to take the data and put it into an Excel spreadsheet. Now, the other approaches we're learning today, I'm not going to do everything in Excel, because you can pull data, and we're actually focusing on as much or more than anything in the next few lessons or steps here is all the different ways we can pull summary data using things like group by and aggregates and so on, right in link. Or to make it even more powerful, we can actually create views. Yes, think back to what you learned with SQL, right? How you can actually create a view in the database, and it can be very advanced with all kinds of subqueries and outer joins and so on and so forth. And it's much easier to write something like that in SQL than it is to do that in Link. So we're going to see how we can do that uh, using view models in most cases, pulling data either with Link or from a database view, right? Now, in all 3 of these little exercises we're going to walk through, you could actually put the data into an Excel spreadsheet or just show it on the screen, right? In the first one, we're going to focus on using Excel. Then after that, we'll be probably just usually just showing it on the view. But of course, you could always then take what you've done here in terms of how you're getting the data and go back to the first example and say how you would throw that into an actual Excel spreadsheet if you wanted to. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of what we're doing today. We might even get through all 3. I don't know if we will, all 3 steps today or not. But what I have is I just opened up here. That's why I was taking a moment to start a class. This is the last version of the Visual Studio medical office example that we were just working on. So we're going to use it as a starting point. This is after step 15, where we added our profile pictures for the patients, right? So we're going to use it and we're going to add these new features. So, all right, so follow along with my demonstration here, the copy paste file and so on. And I have to get that open myself. Give me 1 second. Where are my files? Here they are. All right. Okay, so in this first example, we're going to be actually generating a spreadsheet with our data. So first thing I'm going to do then is come down into the NuGet Package Manager and the Package Manager console, and we're going to install that EPPlus package, the one that's still totally free to use. I mean, it's still covered under a license, and you have to respect it, but it's much more broad, right? Okay, and see, there's even an announcement here about the This is the last version under the LGPL license, right? So everything going forward is a non-commercial license, and you can still use it for learning and so on, but not for commercial uses without actually being willing to pay somebody. Okay, so there's some more detail there and some history on updates and so on, but I'll let you read through that on your own. So now we have it there, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a link query where we pull data and then put it into a spreadsheet, right? So, in the past, I've just sometimes added this code into existing controllers, but we're going to be doing quite a work with sort of different reports today. So I've decided that this time around, we're actually going to create a dedicated report controller. So that'll be the first thing I'm going to do now that I have the EPPlus installed. I'm going to make a new controller. Now I'm starting off with an empty controller because it's not for maintaining any one of our entities in particular. Oh, I'm going to call it report controller. Okay. Now we are going to want to work with our database. So that's the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, well, first of all, change it so it inherits from cognizant controller, so it's self-aware, and then get the constructor in place so that we'll have our DB context, our medical office context available, right? Now, I haven't made an index view yet. So if you were actually come here without supplying an action, it would default to index and give you an error right now. So, make sure you come back and give a proper redirect to somewhere that you would want them to go, right? I'm not going to do it right now, but that's something to think about and remember to do. What we're going to do is we're going to add an action in here in a moment. So I might as well get a link ready to actually be able to select it. This is going to be just we're pulling data about all the appointments that have been put into the system. We're going to put it out into Excel. So let me come down to our menu system, which is of course in our layout, right? And down here with the nav system that we have, I'm going to add yet another link. Okay, I'm going to make it a drop-down link, building on the drop-down menu that we have so far. I think I'm going to throw in yet another divider first, because this is kind of a separate little section in the drop-down menu. And then, it's because I didn't get it properly copied. There we go. All right, so we'll have a divider. Then we're going to have a link. Notice the controller we're going to is our report controller. Action is download appointments, right? So this is going to be a click this link, and it will actually prompt us to download our spreadsheet in a few moments. Okay, so let's come back to the report controller. And right in here, then I'm going to add the code for my download appointments. Now, there's a bit of code here, and we'll walk through it, right, together. So just let me grab it first of all. Okay. All right. So you might have noticed something. It immediately added a couple of extra usings for us. This OfficeOpenXML, right? So that and plus the style, okay, because it saw that we're using some of these styling attributes that are available as well. Notice that it doesn't mention EPPlus, okay, because EPPlus is just based on and uses the Office Open XML utilities that are built into our .NET framework. Okay, so let's come down here. Download appointments, and what are we going to do? Well, first of all, we have a link query to go and get data, right? The whole idea is we're going to populate the spreadsheet with data from the database. So it's a pretty straightforward link query. We're just coming here to the context.appointments. We're including the appointment reason, the patient, and the doctor. So everything that relates back to an appointment, we're pulling in, right? Adding an order by, we're going to put it by that start time, okay, in descending order. Now, though, I'm going to select from this into a new, notice it's an anonymous type. I didn't create a class, a view model class for this. It's just going to be an anonymous type, right? So just coming through, I take that start time, just putting into a short date string, okay? The patient, I can take advantage of the fact that all of these uh, objects, okay, have their own summary properties. So I can pull the full name of the patient down here, again, doctor full name, for the patient phone number, the phone formatted, and so on, right? Pulling them all into these different properties. Now notice on the last one, I could say notes equals, but without specifying, it actually just takes the name of the property that I'm returning here. So it will be called notes. Now, one thing to mention before I even go on, these properties then of this anonymous type, these will eventually become, um, well, basically headings, right, above columns in my actual spreadsheet itself, right? So if you did ever want to have separate words in this heading, a trick I'll share with you right now is use the underscore between the words. And that way, when it converts over to Excel, that actually will be changed into a space automatically, right? So if, for example, the appointment reason, right? If I wanted to say instead of just reason, appointment reason, then I could just put appointment underscore reason, and it would just become, it would replace the underscore with a space in the actual Excel spreadsheet. All right, so that's just the first bit. We're just getting data, okay? And there it is, an iQueryable, right? In this case, our APPTS, our appointments. All right, now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see, do I actually have data? So I'll do a count. How many rows do we have, right? Because of course, if we have no data, I'm not going to try to create an Excel spreadsheet, right? There's no point doing that. We'll just go on and skip over everything else. But if we actually have data, so the number of rows is greater than 0, then okay, we're going to come in, we're going to make an Excel document that we can then download. So look how easy it is. We just make a new Excel package. That's it, right? And then we start working with it. So let me just mention though, I have it all commented out, but quite often what you're going to want to do is instead of just starting from scratch, from a totally blank document, quite often what you might want is to actually have sort of a template to work from, an existing document that you're going to start with and then add data to, right? I'll share with you that this is something that I did a lot in work, especially for credit unions. I've done a lot of work for credit unions throughout Ontario, even down east, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, uh, where they would get data coming from a mainframe server of some sort in one format or another, and I'd be pulling it into an Excel spreadsheet. And quite often I would just have one tab in the spreadsheet where you'd basically just dump all the data, right? And then on other tabs in the spreadsheet, you'd have nicely formatted reports and so on, charts and things like that, that would pull data from that one tab that just had all the raw information, right? So that would be a situation similar to what you could do here, is what I'm describing is instead of starting a new from scratch Excel package, right? If we have already uploaded a file that is that Excel template, the document with everything in place except for the data itself, right? Maybe it's in our uploaded files, right? So I could do a link query here, go to my uploaded files, include the file content. Say I'm planning ahead for that one-to-one relationship where I offload the content, right? Identifying it by the ID and so on. That gets us the spreadsheet, right? And then using a memory stream, okay, we can get the byte array out of it, and look at that. It's easy as that. We get the memory stream and we pass it as an argument to when we create a new Excel package. And that would take that document we had uploaded and give us our Excel, right? Away we go. So that's another option, is you can actually have a pre-formatted, laid out Excel by uploading it first, storing it in the database, and pulling it out now. All right, but that's not what we're doing. Right now, we're just making a new blank document. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a worksheet. Okay, so I go to the workbook, worksheets, and add one. I'm going to call it appointments. So that name will actually appear, you're familiar with Excel, right? The little tabs across the bottom for each worksheet, right? That will be the name on the tab, is appointments. Okay, now in the next few snippets of code, we see a couple of different ways that we can refer to individual cells, columns, blocks of cells, and so on, right? So this first one here, okay, cells, row, and column. So basically row 3, column 1, right? That identifies the cell on my worksheet, right? And so leaving 2 blank rows above it, what I'm doing is I'm coming down to the third row, first column. Most things we're used to having a 0 index. 0 is the index of the first element of a collection in most cases. But the cells on a worksheet is different. The first row, first column, indexes are 1, right? So this one here is indicating the first column. So row 3, column 1. Look at that, load from collection. So all we do is we pass in, okay, the data from our query we have up here, right? We just pass that into load from collection. The second argument, as you see there, is a Boolean, right? Does it show it there? Yeah. Oh, Boolean print headers, right? Yeah, it says it right there. So I'm saying true. So in other words, remember I mentioned these properties become the headers on top of each column, right? So that Boolean allows me to say, yes, include these names here as the headings on top of the columns below, right? So I don't have to say how many I have. It will just start in that one cell, okay, row 3, column 1, and just put the data in that whole area, right? So that's one way to refer to an individual cell. Now we can see I'm referring to an entire column. So column 1, okay, that's the first column, which actually has the date. So I'm applying a number format here. Column 4 is where we're showing those extra fees, right? That's a currency amount. Now I'm not going to include the dollar sign because that just, it gets cluttered, having dollar signs everywhere all up and down your column. So I usually would leave that out and just have it in, 2 decimal places and a commas between the thousands and so on, right? Okay, so that's a individual cell, individual columns. Now, sometimes we want to do work on a block of cells. So another way we can call cells is we pass the start row and column and end row and column, right? So here, for this block, starting in row 4, column 1, going all the way down, right, to num rows plus 3. I'm adding 3 because remember I started on the 3rd row down, okay? And column 2. So basically the first 2 columns with all the data, I'm setting the font style to bold. Okay, so we have bold font for those first 2 columns. All right, so that's good. We've seen how to talk to one cell, a whole column, a block of cells, but in all cases, we've only actually done one thing with whatever cell or block of cells we've addressed, right? There are times when we want to make multiple changes, right, to a identified cell or block of cells, right? Column, whatever. So what we use then is called an Excel range. So we can give it a name, okay? So using this Excel range, I'm calling total fees, okay? Now it is a single cell in this case, but I'm giving it a name as a range so I can do multiple things to it, okay? So which cell is it? Well, I go to num rows plus 4, right? So that's one more than the last row of data. Num rows is how many rows of data I have. Remember, I started on the 3rd. So this will go one row below, okay? And column 4, if you remember, that's the same one I worked with up here. That's where I'm showing that dollar figure, the extra fees that were collected in the appointment, right? So with that particular cell, total fees identified, what am I going to do? Well, jumping ahead, you can see here I'm going to make it bold. Yep, I'm going to apply a number format. Ooh, even including the dollar sign. I don't want it everywhere, but in this one case, I don't mind having the dollar sign in front of the number. But the most important thing we're putting here is look at that, an Excel formula, right? Now I think we've all had experience doing formulas in Excel, right? It might be sum or whatever. And in this case, we're going to total up or sum up the value of all the extra fees charged and all the appointments in the data. So we know how an Excel formula works. Usually we have the like from a certain cell to another cell, right? We're going to sum up everything in the data in a whole range of cells. But when we do it in the formula in Excel, it's normally we have that combination of letter and number, like D1 to D5 type of thing, right? Well, that's what we're doing here as well. But of course, to get those actual addresses, this is the approach we take. I go to the worksheet, the cells, so 4th row, 4th column, right? And then by dot address, so ABCD, that will be D4, right? That'll be the address returned by this. So say D4 colon, right? And then over here, num rows plus 3, okay? In other words, the last row of data, 4. So I don't know what letter that's going to, or sorry, number that's going to be until actually I have data to work with to know how many num rows is. But you can see how it's going to get that address. So in the end, we'll have a formula going from D4 colon to whatever number of rows, 4 as well, right? And that's how we can add a formula. Pretty neat, hey? Now, okay, now the next block of code, we're going to style and put a background color in all those headings across the top, okay? So I'm going to call this Excel range headings, okay? So it goes from row 3, column 1 to row 3, column 7, right across all 7 of the column headings, because we actually have 7 columns, right? So I'm going to set the style, the font to bold. Okay, I'm going to define a background fill. Okay, and the pattern type will be solid, and the background color, we're going to set it to a light blue color of the fill, and that'll give that nice colored light background behind all the bold column headings. All right, let's skip over this next business. We're going to come back and play with that in a few minutes, right? So the next thing we're doing here is I'm calling auto fit columns. Remember, you've done this in Excel, I'm certain as well, where you know, sometimes the column isn't wide enough to show all the data. So sometimes we'll just go to in the sort of top area there, you can click on the little line between columns and it will just automatically adjust the width of one column. But if you select a whole area of the spreadsheet, you can just do an auto fit, right? And it makes every column wide enough to show the data contained in the column. Well, that's what we're doing in code, okay, with that one command, auto fit columns, okay? I've just got a note here that if you do want to adjust the width of a specific column, you can just go with the column, the index number for the column dot width, and set it to whatever value you want. Okay, all right. Now the next bit I do want to talk about a little bit. Obviously, we want a nice title at the top of the report. Okay, and remember we left the first 2 rows blank. We started data, okay, headings first, and then all the data below on row 3. So the first 2 rows are blank. So going in cell 1-1, which is the upper left corner of the spreadsheet, right? We're going to set the value equal to the words appointment report. Okay. And then, you know, we're just going to do some work here. We're going to take that range, right? We're going to merge all the cells together. We're going to make it bold, size 18, and then center the text inside. Right? Now we know how text works in a cell in a cell in Excel. Pardon me, I'm getting tongue-tied here, right? Normally it will just be in the one cell, but if you merge a group of cells together, then you can center it inside that whole range of cells. And that's exactly what we're doing here. Now, notice I only went over to 6. Remember, we actually have 7 columns, but I'm leaving out that last column, the one for notes for now. You'll see why in a minute, okay? So that puts my nice big appointment report centered above everything, above the first 6 columns at the top of the page. Now, the next thing, this is something important to remember. So please remember this idea. We're taking data from the database, right? We're putting into a portable object, so to speak, this Excel document. People might print it, they might email it off somewhere and so on. The trouble is that data, as we know, is live, right? It's constantly being updated and changed. So it's always important whenever you run any kind of report, whenever you pull any data out of the database into something portable, like a spreadsheet, you should always make note of when the data was pulled, right? Because that's an important aspect. If you don't know when the data was pulled, you don't know how fresh it is, how old it might be, et cetera, right? So that's what we're doing next. So I'm using UTC, remember we talked about that before, Universal Time Code. That's the time in Greenwich, England, or whatever it is, right? So then I can just find system time zone by ID, okay? So I get my time zone. I'm just gonna make my life simple and go with Eastern Standard Time right now, okay? Then I can convert my UTC date with my time zone and get my local date right here, right? And then I'm going to define a range. Now it's just one cell, okay? So second row, column 6, that's where I'm going to put this, right? I'm going to set the value equals created. So notice I have my local date showing the time first on showing the date, right? That's just a nice human readable way to put it. So such and such a time on such and such a date, right? And I set it to bold, size 12. And here's a kind of a trick. Now that's obviously too wide for the column, but that's okay because I'm just going to set the alignment to right. And so if it spills out of the width of the column, it will stick out to the left. And that looks perfectly fine on the screen. Okay, so the most important point to remember about this is always make sure you grab a timestamp of when data was pulled and include it with the data. Okay, that's it. And we're done. We've built everything we want to add to the actual spreadsheet. So now we're ready to download it. And this is going to be fairly familiar because it's similar to the kind of download work we've done before. So I can just get to my Excel object, my Excel package, get as byte array. Look at that, okay? And there we are. The data is our byte array, right? And we've done this before. Return file. Remember we did this when we first set it up, so we'd have a link to click. You could download a file that we had uploaded and stored in the database. And the arguments here are the same. We pass the byte array, we pass the MIME type, and a file name, right? So we're just getting ready. The file name, I'm just going to call it appointments, and it's a XLSX, okay, extension. The MIME type is the appropriate one for these open Office XML formats for Office documents, right? And we just say return file. In a catch block or try catch block, of course, we'll just say bad request, or of course, if we had no data, we turn not found, no data, right? And that's it. So we should be able to give it a try. Any questions? All righty. Okay, very good. All right. Might take a moment or two to come up here. I think I deleted the database, so it had to create it and see the data and so on. All right, so here's the browser. And here we go. I'll just come down here to my download appointments. And here it comes up. So here, I'm going to overwrite. I did this with the other section earlier, so I already have a spreadsheet here. I'll overwrite that one, and I'll click Save. Yes. And there we go. So we have downloaded our Excel. So I can click here to open it up in Excel, and we'll have a look at it. Okay. Now, we won't be able to do anything with it. The formulas won't calculate or anything until I click this Enable Editing. Okay, that's just a safety thing. It opens it in protected view first. There we go. So there's our nice, we merged all these cells together to get our title appointment report created on 1:04 p.m. on this date. There we go. Nice. So there we see all the dates, the patient name, the reason for the appointment, how much the extra fee charge was, the phone number, and the full name of the doctor. Then, of course, we have all these notes out here. Remember, that's that large amount of data that you can add, making notes and comments about the appointment and so on. We used a, a variation on lorem ipsum, okay, called bacon ipsum to come up with some data here, right? But let me go down, way down to the bottom, and there we are. So there's that formula we put in, right? Look at that. Sum D4 colon D538, right? So that shows all the data that we actually have, and that adds it all up, puts it in a nice bold currency format, right? See how the first two columns are bolded and so on and so forth. So what do you think? Pretty easy to get all the data in there, eh? Just a quick load, basically, command, and away we go. Now, one thing that probably strikes you looking at the screen right now, these notes, that's a bit of a problem. They're so big. Do we want to include them? Sure, we do, but maybe we'll see how we could maybe improve on that a bit. So I'll leave it running. I'm going to come back in here. I skipped over this whole section, so let's talk about it now. Right, so I'm just going to, well, actually, I guess the whole block here, I can take out one level of comment because my two comments at the top should stay there. Okay. Boy, those notes are big, right? So we're going to put them inside comments instead. If you've done comments in Excel, basically you get a little kind of a red slash marker in the upper right corner of the cell as a visual clue to say there's a comment available here. And you just hover over it with your mouse and it will pop up in a little dialog box to read the actual comment, right? So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to go through, so the data is already there, right? It's in the spreadsheet. So this code is working with the data that's already been copied in, right? So starting in row 4, because remember that's our first row of actual data. Row 3 had the actual column headings, okay? Down to I less than num rows plus 4, right? Incrementing one at a time. So as we go through, I is each row as we go down through, right? So we define our range as the one cell, one at a time in this loop as we go down. So I'm going to take the value, toString it, and split it, okay, with spaces in between the words, right? And that'll give me my array of words here. Well, actually, we're looking for the space, I should say, between the words, and that then gives me separate words here, my comment words. So that's the whole string broken up into separate words, identified by a delimiter, so to speak, of a space. Okay, so I'm going to take the very first word, of course, zero index, because this is one of our collections, right? So that'll be the first word. I'm going to add dot, dot, dot. And that is what will be displayed or shown inside the cell will be that first word, right? Okay. Now, what we're going to do, truth is, even bringing it up in a comment, that little pop-up little dialog box sort of thing, if it was all one big long string, it would still all be on one line. It would stretch forever across the screen, just like we saw it was doing, just it'll only be one at a time in this little pop-up, right? So we're going to do a bit of link magic here to take and automatically add a new line character every 7 words, right? So let's think of it like a carriage return. We're typing 7 words, ka-ching, we go down to the next line, type the next 7 words. That's exactly the idea here, right? So we join back together with the environment new line, okay? Taking our current words, we select each one, pulling the index, etc., and then we grouping by index divided by 7. That basically gives us 7 words at a time. We join it back up, okay? And that's what we output, right? And that's it. So we make our command, okay, our Excel comment, okay? The range is the cell. So we add the comment into it with appointment notes. Okay, that'll be the actual sort of caption to the comment itself. And that's it. Then we take the column itself or the cell and we do an autofit. And that's it. So that will give us all the comments expressed in a much different way. I'm just going to do a hot reload, bring it up here. Again, I can just replace it. And you'll see the difference. I think I opened 2 copies of it, but that's okay. All right. So yeah, so now you see, we just see the first word and 3 dots. But as I hover over, right, there it is broken out. Again, if we didn't split it up, with these hard returns, so to speak, at the end, it would be one little narrow, one line stretching way off to the right and have to scroll left and right to read it all. So that's kind of I thought, a nice way to show the actual notes themselves, right? What do you think? Okay. And everything else is here exactly as it was before, getting down to the bottom and so on, right? There's our formula down here still. Yep, good. We didn't lose anything by adding our comments or our notes here in the comments. So there we go. What do you think? Pretty easy to work with Excel, isn't it? Quite powerful. All right. Well, that's not all we can do with Excel. Woohoo! Hang on. I'm going to stop and start the recording though, just to help break it up.